Well, shooters and reloaders out there, it's Fortune Cookie 45 LC coming to you from the hot lead zone. And also hello to all the great patrons over there on the Patreon site, Three Circles, passengers and members. First, I'd like to thank the new patrons, and that's Captain Rex, Don Martin, Brad Ford, and Fran Breeden. So thanks again to the new patrons, and be sure to post comments and questions and requests and all that good stuff. But I've got a little tip for some of you. A lot of you will watch the video for like 8 minutes and then they fly off to another video, and you'll miss out on some of the things that might be new and pertinent on the topic. So what you can do is to use the speed control, because I've enabled the speed controls, and you can go 1.5 speed or 2 speed, 2 times speed, and actually get more of the video in a shorter amount of time. So makes me sound like a chipmunk, but that's okay. Today we're doing part 6 on the reloading die comparison, right at the bench doing actual reloading. And today's topic is Forster Dies. Now, Forster is a very interesting company in Lanark, Illinois, and that's located in the upper northwest corner of Illinois. And the cool thing about that is they're within an 1.5 or 2 hour drive from a lot of big cities, such as Milwaukee and Kenosha and Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City. All of those cities are within a short distance from Lanark, Illinois. And Lanark, Illinois is an interesting town. It's got a population of about less than 2,000, but that's where Forster is located. Now, back in the 1970s, the company was Bonanza, and they were well known for their coax press. But in the late 70s, Forster took over Bonanza. And the way we know that is right here. I've got 2 die sets from Forster, and they say Bonanza Forster on there. And it says bench rest dies, because that's what Forster was well known for. That's what Bonanza was well known for. What Bonanza did was they took the principle of the bench rest shooter's hand dies. Now that's the dies that you put together by hand, and then you put them into an arbor press to do the case sizing and bullet seating, all that kind of thing. And the bench rest shooters loved that, because what happened was the case, when the bullet was being seated, the case went into a chamber. And then the bullet was put in, and the little seating stem was pushed down by the arbor press, and that's what caused the inline seating. Well, what Bonanza did was adapted those same principles into dies for our regular reloading presses in general, and the Bonanza coax in particular. So notice again, you got Forster Bonanza back in the late 70s bench rest dies. But all of your current Forster dies are in Forster Products boxes with the same bright red box, but now a different box design. So let's give you a close-up of these dies. You notice that these two, it's in 25-06 and 6mm Remington. The reason why I have those calibers is because those are the calibers I use to do varmint shooting up in Weed, California and Williams, California, when I was doing the varmint hunting out there for ground squirrels. Now the thing about Forster is they don't make any handgun dies, because they're really into bench rest rifle shooting and precision rifle shooting. That's what they're best known for. So here's the Forster full-length sizing die. They also make a neck size shoulder bumping die. And the beautiful thing about this die for bench rest considerations is that the expander ball, instead of being down here, the expander ball is up here. And that way the case is all the way in to the die, and then as it's being withdrawn, the neck is expanded while it's still being supported. So you don't lose the support when this is being done. And that's the beauty of the Forster sizing dies. Now notice the cross-lock die lock ring, we like that. But here's something interesting, and that is that, did you know that Forster, back in the early days, was one of the first die companies to have rubber incorporated into their dies? Because right here, there's actually a separate little lock ring for the expander and decapping stem. And right there, there's a little rubber gasket. Can you see that little rubber gasket right there? There it is. And what that does is it allows the decapping pin and expander ball to have a little bit of mobility, so that actually helps for concentricity. And the same idea is the coax press, but then you've got this additional concentricity aid in the die itself. Now I think that what happened with that rubber part, that's probably where the idea of taking a O-ring that's made out of rubber and slipping it over a 7/8 inch die like that, so the rubber is underneath the die lock ring, and when you go ahead and put that into a press, that O-ring allows a little bit of concentricity adjustment. When the case goes into the die, you got a little bit of flex there, and that helps concentricity. That might have been where that idea came from. You'll hear about that idea. And if you loosen the die until the die lock ring isn't connected at all, notice how much of the, you hear that? You got a lot of ability for the die to become coaxial and to align itself with the case going in, so it reduces runout. So this gives you a lot, and the O-ring in there gives you less but some, and that's where that idea came from. Well, certainly if you use that idea, a little bit of the coaxing action here, along with, say, a MEC marksman press where the shell holder has play, well then you got a lot of concentricity there in your system. Now I've actually had Lee users suggest that the Lee O-ring actually does a little bit of die coaxial action because of the rubber O-ring. But really, when you get right down to it, that doesn't happen with the Lee, because the O-ring is set into a little inset right there. You see the inset? So what happens is, the purpose of the O-ring is basically to apply friction between the threads, the die, and the die lock ring, so you get tightening. But you really don't get any O-ring action because there's aluminum to steel connection once the O-ring goes into the inset. So you don't get the same action. Now, having said that, you cannot compete with the degree of coaxial allowance provided by the coax press. For example, here is a Hornady die, and look at the amount of coaxial plus the coax shell holder has a lot of allowance. Look at that. That's why they call this the coax. And for example, if you take our fine Lyman die, look at how much coaxial action you have there. Tons. Now you take the fine Forster bench rest bullet seating die, and they have two of these. One that has a plain, the stem adjustable right here, and then the other one is a micrometer here. Looks like this. But they're essentially the same die. And because of the bench rest principles, like the bench rest hand dies, where the case goes into the hand die, and then the bullet is placed in there with the stem, and then the arbor press seats the bullet while the case is supported by the die. That won't work with a die going into one of our presses unless you have this engineering sleeve. Because the idea is the case goes into the sleeve, and then as the case is pushed up into the die, it gets all the way up in there with the spring, as you see. And then it's at that point, with the case fully supported, that then the bullet is seated. And that's what allows you to get the concentricity, because the full case support offers that inline, low runout bullet seating. That's the essence of the Forster bench rest bullet seating die. Now, Forster Bonanza came out with this bench rest concept first. And when the patent ran out, that's when companies like Redding adopted the sleeve idea in their bullet seating dies for their rifles. And has followed companies like RCBS, Hornady, have all taken on this idea because that's what works. Now, some have said that you can actually take the micrometer off of a Forster die and sub it onto a non-micrometer die, so you only buy one micrometer and use them all your Forster dies. Well, that's not quite true, because if this stem diameter is the same measurement in diameter, then you can sub it. But there's different stem widths, and the stem width for one cannot be subbed onto the other. Well, these dies from Forster are favorites of the precision shooting community, and for good reason. Look at the quality. And for the price that you pay for these, it's really a bargain. Like, you can get a sizing die and the regular bullet seating die for like $80 some odd. And then this one by itself, the micrometer, that's like $90. But for what you get, it's a real bargain. Again, sorry that we're not doing the handgun dies with Forster, but Forster doesn't do handgun dies. But because they are major in the reloading that we do, it has to be included into the discussion of our die sets. Forster. So this has been part 7 of our die comparison series. See you next video. Dylan dies. Bye for now.